Welcome back to What You're Reading Wednesdays. Thanks for tuning in and spending time with us. This week, we'll be discussing the wide world of the young adult genre. What do you think is the main difference between adult and young adult books?
I would definitely say some of the topics, just that fact that YA seems to be limitless, fearless in its breadth of topics. It really just gets into every aspect of human life. We talk about this teenage pregnancy. It talks about drugs. They talk about, sexuality, religion, poor, being rich. I mean, like I said, it just, being, an immigrant from another country and coming to America, like it touches on so many breadth of topics that I feel like that's what distinguishes it. Just the reckless abandonment it gets to have in this genre that I feel like adult fiction or the adult genre, it just in general, just doesn't get to have.
I completely agree. I think a lot of young adult books talk about these topics in a way where it's presented as, a problem, something that requires some deep thought and some emotions that I just don't see in adult fiction, where it's usually more of a plot point and, cleaned up pretty quickly. Because YA books obviously tend to have younger protagonists who deal with these topics, the voice can either make or break a book for me. And I think sometimes it's a little frustrating to follow 13-year-old protagonist's priorities. And those are, books that I just might not read. But it's also true for adult books, obviously, that, sometimes what the narrator's thinking and dealing with is like, oh, I don't like this. Oh.
Yeah, that was probably my answer. Is the only difference with the age of the characters. And also, this isn't true for everything, but for a lot of the topics and the tough stuff that gets talked about in young adult books, I feel like it's handled with more care because of the intended audience. Whereas adult books, like I said, as a society, we don't want our 20, 30 something female characters to have any flaws that they need to work on in the book.
One thing about YA is a lot of times it's written in the first person narrative. So I think you feel like you're right inside that person. I also feel like there's so many emotions involved with young adult literature. So depending on what type of issue they're dealing with, there's all these, rage and anger and sadness and just, doubt and everything going on within that person. And it seems like a lot of times also that you see a maturing of that person as the story develops too, So, reading these books, can be good for teens because they can see that, oh, somebody else has problems in their life too, but look, they're dealing with it. Maybe not in the way you're supposed to deal with it, but they're dealing with it the best way they can.
They tend not to demonize those sorts of negative emotions as much as they work through it. And
emotions are a huge aspect of it, and you get brought into the character so much more. I think back, I keep journals throughout life, and as a teenager, I explored so many different emotions, and it was more like a Dear Diary type of journal. And now when I look back in my 20s, it's more, here's what happened. It's not so much in your head.
All I can say is you gotta love that teenage angst.
Oh yeah.
I still have it sometimes. Yeah.
Justine, are manga and graphic novels written for young adults?
They most definitely can be. Definitely in the West, comics and manga have been geared towards kids and teens. But I, as always, have to stress that there are comics and manga for all ages and interests. If you enjoy reading, there's a good chance that there's a comic or manga that you would like. But I do have some YA comics and manga I could suggest off the top of my head. Giant Days by John Allison is a really good one. I know Mary has read that one as well. And Paper Girls by Brian K. Vaughan. And then some of the manga that has been pretty popular at the library is My Hero Academia. We can't even keep it on the shelves. One Punch Man and Demon Slayer.
So what about the superhero comics? as far as like ages and stuff, because that people like that, there's a gamut of ages that like the superhero comics.
Can
Yeah.
I cut in?
Go for it.
Something that I've studied in my graduate things
Do it.
is yeah.
Come on, Aaron, tell us, girl. Tell us.
Right? All right. So like a lot of the early superhero stuff actually came from newspaper comics, which were of course geared towards children and teens before they started being published on their own as comic books. And at that point, they could be for teens and young adults and some adults. But you had like the morality police at the same time who were really upset that, you have like some of the horror comic books came out at this time and they were just aghast that like children would see this. It's sort of changed now where you can get superhero comics that are for teens and adults without being particularly pandering to either. I think if I were to think of one that I remember seeing and going, oh, that's a good one, is the new Ms. Marvel, Justine, Kamala Khan.
Yep.
With her stuff. That's like, I think the first time where I was like, oh, that's it looks good, it looks interesting, and it's for adults and still deals with some of these YA issues where racism and social status. And the new Ms. Marvel is a Muslim girl who actually, she's a practicing Muslim that you just had not seen before, like beyond maybe an X-Men side character. So it's, yeah. And of course she's in high school, so she's dealing with her stuff there and saving the world. Her and Squirrel Girl, I think, are my two.
Yep, mine too. I like Squirrel Girl.
Yeah.
Yep, those two are my favorite.
I think they're ones that are really, it kind of, like, I don't know, I hate using the term, but like elevated.
They just feel relatable. Like, I want to be their friends.
They are relatable.
And they're
fun. Goofy and wacky and just,
And they still get good fight scenes. I mean, definitely. if we're gonna bring it here, we should point out that Squirrel Girl is the only Marvel character to have defeated Thanatos. Is that the guy's name?
Thanos.
Yeah, Thanos.
Yep. And Galactus. Yep. She's unbeatable. She's the unbeatable Squirrel Girl.
She's.
And the best part is,
tell me about Squirrel Girl. Like, so who is she? Like, I mean, I'm looking like, okay, I'm trying to be confused in this moment. I just want you to explain like what's going on, like you did with the Miss Marvel. Like, I understand, like
much like Tori says, you can't describe perfection.
Oh, here we go.
Squirrel Girl is Squirrel Girl. Justine, you want to take this one? She combines two of her things: girls and squirrels.
Yeah. So originally she was a mutant, and I don't know if they've written her as a inhuman now, just because the trademark. Like who owns the mutant title, but she's college age. She's just, I don't know how to explain her. She's just great. And the best part, because she's unbeatable, but it's not because of her powers. She like talks like villains out of doing things. Like she's like, hey, why are you being like this? And then she ends up like befriending them, and it's just great.
Yeah, so she's likable. Well, she has a squirrel tail.
And she's super strong.
Yeah.
And she could and she could communicate with squirrels. She has Tippy Toe is her little squirrel. She had I'm trying to remember his other name, but she had another squirrel, but he died tragically.
Was it Joe? Was it Monkey Joe?
Yeah, Monkey Joe, yep. But yeah, Tippy Toe is pretty great. And she speaks squirrel, but then they have like a little like translator, like little footnotes of what she's saying and stuff.
You know how like Ant-Man in the movies has his like swarm of ants?
Yeah.
She has that like Snow White style with squirrels.
Oh, okay.
It's my dream, you guys, to find a squirrel that's like injured, nurse it back to health, and then have a squirrel companion.
Is that why your mom sends you the pictures all the time?
Oh yeah, because she knows I love squirrels, yeah. She does. Justine, I bet you can back me up here. My favorite graphic novel that isn't like super depressing like Mouse is Lumberjanes.
Yes. Yes.
Just great for young adults and grown adults. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We actually had one of the writers. We did a Skype book talk for our book club last year.
Noelle?
Yep. No, I would have died if it was Noelle, but it was still good.
I was thinking body positive imaging. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? Yeah, there you go. I was like thinking about like, oh, it's body positive.
And that's kind of a theme that is coming up in like graphic novels, I feel like, in general. So I like that too. Just like being yourself. You don't have to look a certain way, and it's just like an overall acceptance. So that's kind of refreshing.
Saw the cover for Rainbow Rowell's new graphic novel that's coming out, and she looks like a plus size superhero.
Oh, cool.
I forget what it's called.
Oh, is it
something about Faith?
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. That's a character that's been existing, so she's writing. We have a few of them. That's really good. She's a plus size superhero. I've read the first few volumes of that, and that one's pretty interesting too. So it's nice to have representation. Yeah.
If I'm gonna dip back into some of my favorites, you can really tell when women are writing and designing these characters. And I was gonna be very smug about it, but I looked it up, and actually Squirrel Girl is written and drawn by dudes. So
Aaron, why is it important to have YA nonfiction and biographies?
You absolute fool. Why wouldn't it be important? No, it's really important. I mean, some folks aren't going to read nonfiction otherwise. And I think young adult nonfiction in particular does a really great job being succinct. It kind of trims the fat and gets straight to the point, as opposed to like adult nonfiction can spend a lot more time on the details and get a little more in depth that I think turns some people off. So, I mean, I'm not going to say that they're abridged, but they're definitely more streamlined when it comes to books. And when it comes to some of the topics that they cover, that can be very personal for young adults, I think it's important that they just get the facts and can, dispel myths about these things and get straight to it. For biographies, a lot of people don't want to read, big, thick biographies on, whoever they have to do a school report on. So of course it's important to have young adult biographies and shorter biographies. Not everyone's going to sit down and read Ron Chernow. They're not, or David McCullough. It's just not going to happen.
My son did not like to read when he was in school. He didn't want to read fiction. He didn't want to read a mystery. He wanted to read nonfiction, He wanted to read about animals. He wanted to read about sports figures and stuff. So it's important that we have it because some people don't like fiction and they want to read true information. And the one biography we have in the library called Tweak by Nick Sheff is probably, a very, very popular one that we've reordered several times. It's about a teen drug addict. It's very, very good, and it checks out all the time.
Got one example here. This is a little younger than YA, but Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. And each page is basically a quick biography on women in history. And I'm in my 30s and I love reading this myself because it's just a quick snapshot of their lives.
It's like, I even do it now as an adult. Like, if I learn about something and it's like really interesting to me, I want to go and find anything and everything I can about that one topic or event or person. And then I'll just spend weeks only reading about that person, watching documentaries, whatever. And I'm sure, a young adult brain is doing that tenfold because they're, absorbing so much.
Tori, what are some recent trends you're noticing in YA?
I think one that I'm noticing that I am seeking out personally is more own voices queer stories, especially the non-binary ones, just because those stories don't get told often enough. Trans stories, but especially specifically own voices. And also an immigrant story. The way that they're written is just, one is called Internment. If we're talking about TBRs, you should add that to yours because it is beautiful.
My next TBR, so to speak, is the David Yoon book, Frankly in Love, and it's about a Korean American boy and not really understanding his parents, and finding love and things like that.
I'm going to change my phrasing to magical realism instead of urban fantasy. I feel like that has been getting bigger like the past 20 years. So it's not a new thing per se.
Having an online presence, I've seen a lot more attention currently being paid to by POC authors, especially Black authors. And I mean, rightfully so. Obviously, they existed beforehand, but I think they're finally now starting to get a spotlight. So I'm seeing young adult fantasy novels coming out right now, written by real live Black authors who are, it's their first book. They're really looking forward to, whatever, or it's their second. I think Children of Blood and Bone just had a sequel. And I'm seeing a lot of these authors finally getting social media support for what they're doing.
I also, for fun, have seen a few books with villains as the main character, which takes a completely different slant on things, but can make it really fun to watch or to read. And also horror. I'm seeing more horror in the young adult, or there have been in the last few years, more horror.
What are the benefits of reading for teenagers?
Well, I would say enjoyment, because there are many good stories, nonfictions, biographies that can keep you entertained, but also increase your vocabulary. That's something that can happen. And also, since you're increasing your vocabulary, you're probably learning more things. So you're increasing that knowledge base that you have.
Don't take them all, Mary.
Yeah, seriously.
I'm passing it to Erin now.
Yes. Okay. I'm only going to do one because,
sorry.
I'm giving you a hard time, Mary. I'd say that it increases empathy. I mean, you're reading stories about people that you might not think about, and maybe you can finally make the connection that they're people too, even though they might live a different lifestyle or make different choices than you. Angie?
Yeah, I was going to go with something similar, Erin. I know as a teenager, I was very self-obsessed with looks and wearing name brand clothes and, all that. And I feel like reading a story about somebody completely different from you would help expand your view and see something from a new perspective.
I think especially right now, just like escaping into a different world that's maybe not as terrible as the real one right now. Is definitely, especially as a teenager, because trauma really affects you in your teenage years, as far as like sticking with you forever. And then also just like finding comfort in stories that you can relate to, especially as a young person. So
in school, there's so many things you're required to read. And having like that fiction or that book that you really are invested in emotionally is a great escape to have. You're like coming into your own, you're going through a lot of stuff, and you can feel really isolated and you can feel alone, and having a character that you really connect with who's maybe going through the same thing is really helpful, I think, for that time of your life.
Reading at this age or the teenage years, I think is very informative. Like we've touched on before, I think this is the time that you're allowed to make mistakes, and that you're learning way more about yourself than you ever knew. I think that, obviously reading will help your SAT and ACT scores, as well as Learning Express, which is available at Grand Forks Public Library.
All of the above, and then also it helps to process more complex ideas and then to expand the mind in general.
That about wraps up this episode of Whatcha Reading Wednesdays. Thanks again for joining us. As always, let us know if you have specific requests or topic ideas. We'll be back next week, same time, same place. Stay well, stay home, stay curious. Take care. Bye-bye.